Hello, today I'll be doing a review on the Fiio A1 portable headphone amplifier and DAC. So here's what the front of the box looks like. And I like the fact that Fiio gives you a code here so you can go on their website to check the authenticity of the product right here. And then when you slide that outer cardboard box off, inside would be this. And this is where the amp would be sitting. And then underneath there will be the cardboard box where the accessories will be. So you get a user manual. In several different languages. You get a warranty card, and it also tells you how to check the authenticity. And then it also came with another piece of paper that has Chinese on there. I do not know what that says. Now they give you a 3-inch, 3.5 to 3.5 audio cable, and on there they give you an extra plastic clip and another face plastic clip. And the unit already comes with one of them on, by the way. And then they also give you a micro USB, the standard USB charging cable. And then they also give you another 3.5 to 3.5 audio cable. And this one is about 3 feet long, and the charging cable is about 2.5 feet long, approximately. And by the way, those two cables did come in a plastic bag. Okay, so here's the unit itself. Nothing on the bottom. And then here's what the back looks like. So as you can see, towards the right there it would be your line in. So that's how the amp receives audio, which by the way, this is just an amp, no DAC included inside of this. And then over here would be where you plug in the micro USB cable to charge it. The battery life is about 13 hours, and the charge time is about an hour to 1 hour and a half. So about an hour and a half. And when you're charging it, this LED on the front here will turn red, and when it's fully charged it turns green. And then on the front here, this is where you plug in your headphones. And then we have volume control here. So you press these buttons to increase the volume, or you press this button to decrease the volume. And the good news is that you can hold this button down to continuously decrease or continuously increase the volume. Because by pressing the buttons, it is very linear and kind of slow. So you might want to hold it down until it gets to the volume that you want. And then here's our power button, and it also has an LED there as well. So right now it's in the standard mode. And by the way, to power it on, you hold this button down for 2 to 3 seconds. And to shut it off, you also have to hold it down 2 or 3 seconds to shut it off. So right now it's in normal mode. And then this thing comes with a few equalizer settings. So let's go ahead and start off. So the first one here is the standard. So that's just normal. And then when you press the button once, the blue LED will flash once every 2 or 3 seconds. And that basically means that you applied a bass boost. You press the button again, it should be flashing 2 times now, the blue LED. And that's basically the same thing with the bass boost, but it then cuts the treble. And then the last setting, which is called bass effect 3, the light will be flashing 3 times. And that's actually the same thing as normal, which is no bass boost and no treble cut. It's just normal, but it's a lower gain, so less volume. And I have looked at graphs, and that is true. And then you press it again, it should be back at normal. Alright, so let's go ahead and explain those settings. Now, I use the last setting, where it should be flashing 3 times. And the reason because of that is in normal mode, it distorts quite bad, enough to where it's audible. And then when you turn the bass boost on, it distorts even more. And then when you go into the second effect where it does bass boost and treble cut, I will say that has less distortion versus normal or bass boost because it cut the treble. It helps it a little bit in terms of not distorting as much, but it still distorts. So I leave it on the last setting because the distortion isn't audible enough to where it actually bothers you. So if you're playing a bad quality song, like let's say on YouTube, if normal amps, you usually won't hear the distortion as much as this amp. This amp is going to sound really distorted. And even if you're playing a flex song or a CD, it still distorts. So this is the least clean amp I have reviewed on my channel, by the way. So I leave it in the last setting. Now, the other settings are just not usable. But let's go ahead and explain the bass boost. Now, when you turn the bass boost on, it's very warm, muddy, bloated, and most importantly, distorted very heavily. And the bass boost doesn't even sound good. It's very bad. Very, 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 very bad. And then the second setting. The bass boost, it's probably even more warm and muddy now because the treble gets cut. And the quality of the bass is still not good. And it actually cuts the treble a little too much to where it makes it a little too dark sounding. And then ultimately that's why I leave it in the last setting, which is basically just normal but with low gain. So let's go ahead and talk about the last setting, and that's how we're going to explain the audio quality. So that's with no bass boost on, obviously. Now how's the bass on this in the last setting? It's pretty weak, and it is warmer, a little more bloated sounding than, let's say, the topping NX1S, but I will say that it is one of the weaker amps that have bass. It's one of the weaker ones. So let's also then move on to the vocals now. And by the way, the quality of the bass isn't really that good. The NX1S, it sounds more controlled and just better quality, even though it's also pretty weak. But at least the NX1 actually has a good bass boost switch, while this is very bad. So let's move on to the vocals. Now the vocals are going to be a little more harsh and a little more sibilant. So certain singers, when they're making an S sound, this is going to be a little more sibilant in there. And then it also is about just as hollow as the NX1. But it's not as intimate. The vocals aren't as intimate. It's a little more towards neutral. So it's not as forward sounding or inside your head sounding. And that also explains the soundstage a little bit on this. The soundstage on this isn't as narrow as the NX1, but it is still pretty narrow compared to other more higher priced amps that I have that actually have good soundstage. So the soundstage on this is pretty meh. And then let's talk about imaging. Left to right, the imaging is actually worse than the NX1S. But the good news is since it actually has some soundstage, it is able to image a little bit in a circular fashion, just a little bit, but otherwise the imaging is not that good. And then let's move on to treble. Actually, before we move on to the treble, by the way, the vocals will sound a little bit muffled, just a tiny bit more muffled. Actually, a little more than a tiny bit muffled compared to the NX1S, because the NX1S actually has some decent clarity. Well, this is a bit muddy and a little muffled sounding. Alright, so let's move on to the treble, and that's going to be the worst part about the Fiio A1. The treble is, I wouldn't say it's sparkly or bright, but it is harsh and a bit metallic-y, and overall it comes across very sharp sounding, and it doesn't sound very good. Like the treble is not very good quality. So it's a little too sharp for me, just a bit too sharp, especially when you're playing games and you're shooting weapons. It's going to come across way too sharp. And when you're playing music, the sound quality of the treble does not sound very good because it's kind of harsh and metallic-y sounding, and it can be a little bit too sharp on certain songs. So overall, that's basically everything I wanted to talk about this. So let's go ahead and move on to the conclusion now. Do I recommend the Fiio A1? I highly do not recommend the Fiio A1. It's probably the worst amp I have reviewed on my channel, and I totally can't recommend this. Now, if you were looking for something under $50, I'd highly recommend you get something else like a Fiio K1, which is actually by the same company, and it actually sounds a lot better than both the Fiio A1 and the Topping NX1S. And I still can't recommend the Topping NX1S, but the good news, I will recommend the Topping NX1S over the Fiio A1 because it actually sounds better a little bit, even though it doesn't sound that good. And most importantly, the Topping has a better battery life, better volume control, and more importantly, the bass boost on that is actually pretty good. But overall, I don't recommend neither. If you don't care about the features, and if you don't need something portable but you want something sound quality, I'd recommend the K1. So that's basically it. Thank you for watching.